Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Wednesday, June 18th, 2025, episode 417, and we're going to talk about a bunch of war-related topics, beginning with the Thucydides Trap. But why are we talking about this? Well, because Trump's tweets on X are ridiculous as a leader of the so-called free world. I mean, they really are over the top. I've said before how his words shake the market. And if you're an insider, then you know they're coming. And so it destabilizes just regular people's finances and their well-being and their state of mind. Well, when he tweets like this, it shakes up countries, and you have to be some sort of sick individual to want to create panic in a different country, especially knowing that because of the panic, you're going to create situations where people get injured, people get hurt, trying to escape a city, car accidents, fights between people. I mean, just overall chaos. And you might be saying, well, I don't care about them. And as I always say, well, there whatever goes around comes around. And so just wait when the shoe is on the other foot, when we are the ones that are on the receiving end of this kind of ridiculous pronouncements by some leader of a country we do not like, well, then you'll know just how bad it is and how crazy that we'll think that that person is. Why is he doing this to us? Well, I think the those of you who are listening to this, small in number as we are, we should know that it's because they're paying us back for what Trump is doing today and what all past presidents have done as well. By the way, I'm losing listeners, and we're already just at a single digit, but I think I'm losing people because I'm coming out sort of strong anti-Trump. So if you can like it and share it with other people who are like-minded, that would be awesome. But anyway, a couple of the things that he tweeted, uh, which are really over the top. He goes, "We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He's an easy target, but is safe there. We're not going to take him out. Kill, in parentheses, at least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention to this matter." And the next one, he goes, "Unconditional surrender," all caps. And I've said before, unconditional surrender is not negotiation, right? There is no give and take there. And in the episodes where I go over Thucydides, I point out that this unconditional surrender rhetoric and demand, which Israel has imposed on the mouth of Trump, is a not it's a non-starter, right? You can't negotiate if the other side is just simply saying no, surrender, unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender means we walk all over you. You are now our slaves. And no one is ever going to agree to that, especially after you saw what happened in Afghanistan, in Libya, Somalia. Yeah, it's not going to fly. It's a non-starter. Plus, Iran is not like any of those other countries. And so definitely, if I was Iran, I wouldn't bend to this. And so when I read this kind of stuff, it's embarrassing, it's shameful. I am ashamed that this guy is our president, that I voted for him. It's undignified, right? When you do something like this domestically, I haven't said anything. Like I didn't comment. I didn't like it, but I mean, it's Trump, right? And so it only pretty much affects uh, the United States, and that's our problem. But when you're on the world stage and now you're affecting people in different countries, now it's ridiculous. And it makes us a laughing stock of the world. People are laughing at us. I don't care how you feel about Trump and about the United States, but you got to understand people all over the world are laughing at the United States. And that might make you say, ooh, we should go after them too. Well, see, that's why you're a laughing stock, okay? Because the United States is not in a position to dictate demands on other people, right? We are financially bankrupt. We are morally bankrupt. We're full of hypocrisy. We bomb countries all over the world. We bully other people into doing. We steal other people's assets, and I've talked about all of these issues before. And so now to make these demands as if we're somehow righteous, that we're the most powerful militarily, is kind of ridiculous, right? And it's all lowbrow behavior on top of all the lying, the backstabbing that I've already discussed, right? I mean, other people have come out and said this as well. You're in the middle of negotiations, and then the whole time you are planning an attack. That is dastardly. That is low down, you know, low level. I mean, the lowest of the low, lowest form of life kind of method. And whoever was involved in that kind of strategy, yeah, you're a low life. You're the lowest of the low. And so, yeah, it's Pearl Harbor, right? I mean, remember what Pearl Harbor was, right? Why did people feel so outrageous, right? Outraged because we were in discussions. And then all of a sudden there's a surprise attack out of nowhere. Yeah, the outrage, the moral outrage, yeah, that is now directed against the United States. And so, yeah, it's pretty serious and it's upsetting. It's upsetting to someone who grew up in a time where we used to laugh at countries that did this very thing, that would talk in this very way, right? And now we are the ones doing it, right? And I say we, right? I can't not say we, right? Because this is our government and people all over the world, they don't care who you voted for. When the bombs start dropping, they're not going to say, oh, well, except for this house because they voted another way. No, it doesn't matter. We live in America. We're all treated in the same way. Uh, I already discussed isolationism, how that is just simply a pejorative, right? It's a nonsense word. It's not used correctly. It has a lot of meaning. And basically, all it means is you're anti-war. You're anti the war I want to join, right? And that's all it is. I discussed it at length in episode 37. You can check that out, but I want to talk about Thucydides trap. So Wikipedia defines it. The expression was inspired by ancient Athenian historian and military commander Thucydides and coined by the American political scientist Graham T. Allison around 2011 based on an observation by Thucydides in his History of the Peloponnesian War that it was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. Allison used the term to describe a tendency towards war when a rising power, such as Athens, challenges the status of ruling power, such as Sparta. Allison expanded this significantly in his 2017 book, Destined for War, in which he argued that China and the US are currently on a collision course for war. Though Allison argues in Destined for War that war between a ruling power and a rising power is not inevitable, war may be very difficult to avoid and requires extensive and intensive diplomatic attention and exertion in the case of a Thucydides trap. End quote. So I paraphrase, I took out a little bit just to make it a shorter read, but the idea is that the Thucydides trap is talking about a rising power challenging an existing power. So China is challenging the United States. But in order for this to happen, you need nations stoking fear. So, what's missing in this explanation of Thucydides' trap is how it played out in Thucydides himself. And so, I read and taught Thucydides' collection of speeches, the speeches that he recorded in the Peloponnesian War, and it's abridged, right? So it's only the speeches and a little bit of the commentary and it's entitled On Justice, Power, and Human Nature. And through those speeches, you get to the core of what's going on in this war dynamic. Corinth, a city in Greece, much, much smaller than Athens or and Sparta, right, really wants to attack Athens. But Corinth cannot do it by itself. And so it needs to convince another much more stronger, powerful city-state to do what it actually wants to do. So Corinth goes to Sparta and says, hey, man, you got to go to war with Athens. And Spartans are like, why? And they're like, oh, because see, they're going to take over the world. And so you got to take them out now while they're not yet as strong as they will be, et cetera, et cetera. If you read the speeches, you'll know that it is very much exactly what you hear today. They call them isolationists, right? They say, "Oh, you only mind your own business. You're not aware of what's going on in the world. Athens is going to, once they take these people out, then they'll take those people out, and it's a domino theory, okay? And so you see all of the arguments that you hear today, except it happens 2,500 years ago in Greece. But it's exactly the same thing. This is why it's all propaganda. These are just stories that people are going to tell to try to get a population all riled up and willing to go along with massive death and destruction. Okay, and so that's the Thucydides trap, in my opinion, right? So you're going to paint a picture where a country is going to be a threat, and so you have to do something about it. And in this case, it's not China, it's not Russia, it's Iran, okay? And Israel can't take Iran by itself. Everyone knows this. Israel knows this, which is why the only reason why they attacked Iran is because they know they control America. They will get America to join this war, which is why we should say no. 60% of America uh, are against this war. We should be extremely vocal and make sure Donald Trump gets the message, no war. We can't afford it. And I've talked about it in the last episode. We can't afford it, right? If anything, this is just simply going to trigger whatever plan they have next, which is the cover, right, for CBDCs or whatever. If the Israelis had Netanyahu, they were, dumb enough to elect him, and he was going to take him to war, a war much, much bigger than most of the people there, I am sure, never expected or wanted. Well, let them have it, okay? It is none of our business. And if they did not want to all die or to have massive casualties, then they should have talked more. They should have negotiated. They should have actually negotiated, in other words, yielded something in addition to demanding lots of things. And of course, this whole unconditional surrender, our way or the highway, all of it or none of it kind of thing. This is not negotiation. This is just stupidity. This is just absolute asinine, short-sighted, narrow-minded behavior. It's disgusting, is what it is. So what Israel did was a preemptive strike. And if you go to the EBSCO website, it describes preemptive strike this way. And it's just as good as any other, so I'm sure you can find this in many other places, but this is what it had. Again, I edited it a little bit. Military actions undertaken by a nation to neutralize an imminent threat from another country is a preemptive strike. Defined as defensive attack. Interesting expression, defensive attack. Preemptive strikes are aimed at mitigating potential damage from an anticipated assault. While international law and the United Nations recognize the right to self-defense, the evidence required to justify such actions often contentious. The distinction between preemptive strike and preemptive war is preventative war is critical. To me, there's no difference. And I think this website is trying to, I think it's a neocon site, right? Where they are trying to find a justification. And so they're going to try to make a distinction between preventative war and preemptive strike. But really, if you parse it out, they're exactly the same, okay? But it's saying preemptive strike and preventative war, the differences are critical. The latter is considered illegal under international law as it addresses threats predicted in the future rather than imminent dangers, right? Historical examples such as the 1939 Nazi invasion of Poland illustrates the complexities and moral considerations surrounding preemptive actions, which have often been condemned by the international community. The post-September 2001 U.S. response, particularly under the Bush Doctrine, has intensified this debate, with efforts to redefine preemptive action raising concerns about unilateral military engagements, the ongoing discussions regarding threats from nations like Iran, North Korea continue to shape the discourse on the legitimacy and ethical considerations of preemptive military actions. In other words, it's criminal behavior, right? If you ever watch the movie Minority Report, right, it's a thought crime. You're thinking about it. Oh, we got to punish you. We got to come after you for thinking about it, not for anything that you actually did. Also, the point of a movie like Minority Report with Tom Cruise in it, which is very interesting. I love the movie because of the concept, which is that human choice. When you are actually faced with that moment of choosing, you still have a choice. And the whole Minority Report premise is that you have the supercomputer or something where these precognitive people, right, who can look into the future, they see one possible outcome, one possible historical line, but choice can change that, right? And so there is no guarantee that someone will. That's right. In the movie, they call it pre-crime, right? So we caught you before you committed the crime, which you are definitely going to commit. But that's the thing. You didn't commit it. There was no crime. And if you were in that moment where you had to make a decision, who's to say that you would choose a different choice? And that was the thing. And so this whole idea of preemptive military action could be circumvented by talking, by negotiating. And this whole thing that Trump is talking about and Israel's talking about, you have already written into the future what is going to happen, which hasn't happened, but you think it's going to happen. And so you have that problem going on. And it's very difficult to convince anyone, particularly the people who are attacked, to tell them, no, you were going to do this, right? Well, I don't know. There's no proof, there's no evidence, right? Uh, and so the countries, of course, the countries who are actually, right, so they're saying, this website is saying, like, Iran and North Korea might do it. No, no, the countries that are actually doing it are the United States and Israel, right? So you see what I mean? There's this weird sleight of hand bait and switch where you're going to have them say, oh, well, yeah, Iran, North Korea, yeah, they're really bad. They're not thinking of doing preemptive strikes. It's the United States and states like Israel that are actually planning on doing preemptive strikes, right? And so you see this projection thing that neocons and people on the extreme left are very frequently guilty of doing. And then there's the domino theory. If we don't stop them now, they'll just keep on going. And that's a fear-mongering strategy. Domino theory is funny. I was reading it in my eighth grade history textbook. That was the theory. That's the reason why we went into Vietnam. Domino theory. Well, if we don't stop the communists now, they're going to take over all of Asia, blah, blah, blah. Right? The domino theory, which has long been debunked, disproved. They brought it back to life again with the whole Ukraine thing. And since it worked so well with Ukraine, the Israelis, they are using it again. If we don't stop the Iranians now, they're going to be at the door of the United States, which is totally ridiculous. That's not going to happen, right? They were in peace talks for crying out loud with Trump, right? Because they wanted peace. Russia volunteered to take all the nuclear material to facilitate the deal because Russia wants peace. It just makes me crazy just thinking about all the stupid that there is in the United States. People are going to believe what they want to believe, right? Also, Israel wants US's help. Why? Right? When was the last time the United States won anything significant? Right? Was it Afghanistan? No, no, they lost there after 20 years. Was it Iraq? No, the Iraqis want to kick out the United States. They keep saying leave, and the United States won't leave. Sometimes they pretend to leave and then they go right back in. How about the Houthis in Yemen, who everyone called a backwards, primitive military? Yeah, they couldn't even take them out. And in fact, you had aircraft carriers trying to get away from Houthi-fired missiles. It's kind of crazy, right? That people have such a bad understanding and short memory that we don't remember just how good, quote unquote, American help is when it comes to military. It's just simply not help, right? Maybe help you to lose, and maybe that's what they want, but I don't know. I would rather not. I would rather not see all the death and destruction. People go back to the negotiating table, for the United States and Israel to bend over backwards and say, yeah, we blew it. So now we are the ones that have to abide by the imposition, right? All of the things that are being imposed on us. And that's what really pisses me off, right? There was negotiation, legitimate negotiation going on. But now, when the United States loses, I'm saying when, right? Because so far everything has happened in the way that I thought that it would, right? The Iranians would send over first its cheap missiles, which would force Israel to deplete all of its ammunition, and then they send in the good stuff, and there's nothing to stop it, right? They did that before last October, I believe, and they're doing it now. So it's like, come on, who are we kidding, really, right? Who are Americans who think that they are so superior to everybody else that you want to lose yet another war, waste all this money, and put the United States into further uh, risk of uh, everything, of collapse, and it's there. I just want to close with talking about the prisoner's dilemma. I thought I had a standalone episode on it, but I don't. But I know I talked about it. And I know I talked about it in a sermon. I thought I talked about it in a regular episode. But here we go. Prisoner's dilemma. And what's interesting about the prisoner's dilemma is it doesn't have to be a dilemma or having to make a decision. So do I go left? Do I go right? And so you're in a dilemma. You don't know which one to choose, right? Because you don't know what other people are going to do. So it's a dilemma. Basically, a dilemma is when you have two or more options and neither of them are good, right? There are no obvious benefits, and so it's a very, very difficult choice. Which one are you going to do? Okay. So the prisoner's dilemma, it's basically the way I did it in classroom with my eighth graders, or seventh graders, actually. Actually, I did with all my grades, and only the seventh grade did it in a way that makes sense, right? Because the eighth graders, they started cheating, right? So anyway. So the prisoner's dilemma, you have two kids facing away from each other, and you tell them if one person betrays the other, if one narcs on the other, right? If one tells on the other, then the one who tells on the other, they get a certain number of points, and the person who gets narked on, they get nothing. Okay. But if both stab each other in the back, they both narc on each other, right? They both tell on each other, then you get zero, or you only get like 1 point or each or something like that, right? But if both people stay silent, right? If both people don't narc on each other, both sides benefit. So overall, if there's cooperation between the two prisoners, they make out better, right? And so this prisoner's dilemma works also with countries who are trying to negotiate with each other, right? Should I trust this person, this country, or not, right? And so it's a dilemma. You're faced with a very difficult choice. But if you both agree to peace, not to betray each other, then there is benefit, far greater benefit for both countries that are involved. And so if you go by the points, I don't remember exactly how the points were assigned, but if one person stabbed the other in the back, then I think you get something like uh, 4 or 5 points. If you both betrayed each other, you get 2 points, 1 point each, right? But if you both cooperate with each other, right, you get something like 4 points each, but the total is 8. And so, as a whole, as a world society, the world becomes better, right? So no individual country is able to get a clear edge on each other, but by not having death and destruction, everyone benefits. So trust and cooperation is the way. That's the way to go. But because Trump betrayed the trust of Russia, China, Iran, all these other countries, then there's no trust anymore. And so you can see that war is going to be in our future. Violence is going to be in the future. And no one benefits from this right? I've explained this before. Instead of making refrigerators, instead of making air conditioners, we're going to make bombs and missiles, right? That doesn't benefit me in any way. And so overall standard of living of the United States is going to go down. And plus, who's the United States going to trade with? Who are we going to trade with? Right? And then how do you cooperate? Right. And so now the United States tries to cooperate with Israel. What? Israel is completely dependent on us, right? Right now, all of their weapons, their economy is being sustained by the United States. There is no benefit from this relationship at all. And And so Israel is wrong. Why? Well, because they stole all this land. They did it through edict. Before the Balfour Declaration, before, Israelis started moving into, stolen land in Palestine, right? In Israel, what is now Israel. There were Jews living there, except no one cared. And it's because they bought the property, right? And so I think my belief, firm belief, is that if Jews or is now Israelis moved there and it was an organic process where, you know, Jews went over there, bought land from people who would sell it to them, then you would have peace. But that, of course, is not what they wanted. They wanted to take advantage of the political connections that they had, and they stirred up all this animosity, right? So still, the solution is to cooperate. It's not war. War is never the answer. Hopefully, hopefully enough people get through to Trump and he stops with these obnoxious tweets and someone beats some sense into him. And so we don't go into war where so many of our children and loved ones have to sacrifice their lives only because these people just have egos that are just simply way too big. And when I mean egos, I mean they're all Western egos rather than the global South. That's it for this episode. Please like, subscribe, share, whatever it is you're supposed to do, uh, and uh, and hopefully we'll have more peace tomorrow than today. I'll talk to you guys next time.